used to believe accidents belonged to other families, the kind you hear about on the radio, then switch off so your heart can settle. In our life, danger felt like something that stayed outside, parked on someone else's street. We had routines. We had bills we mostly paid on time. We had a little boy who ran barefoot through the hallway like the world was made for him. My name is Mara. I worked part-time at a clinic, did the school drop-offs, and carried the invisible calendar. Permission slips, grocery lists, dentist appointments, the extra socks Eli always lost. If our home felt steady, it was because I was always bracing it from the inside. Some nights I fell asleep mid-thought, still rehearsing tomorrow's needs, still trying to stay ahead. My husband, Jonah, would have said he was steady too. And in some ways, he was. He built bookshelves on weekends and fixed the leaky faucet without a sigh. He kissed Eli's forehead every night like it was a promise. But Jonah's steadiness had an edge, like a board that looks smooth until you get a splinter. Jonah was protective, not the sweet, movie kind where a man wraps a jacket around your shoulders. Jonah's protection came with rules. It came with warnings. It came with a tone that made you feel irresponsible for breathing the wrong way. He checked the locks twice before bed. He mapped safer routes to school. He asked where I was going and what time I'd be back, not always like a question, sometimes like a requirement. For years, I told myself that was love. That vigilance was devotion. That his worry meant we mattered. When friends joked that Jonah was intense, I laughed along, because it was easier than explaining how intensity can quietly tighten around your life. There were good days, bright, ordinary days that made me feel silly for doubting. Friday takeout in paper bags that steamed up the car windows. Jonah letting Eli stay up late to finish a puzzle. Jonah catching my eye across the kitchen and smiling like we still had secrets. Those moments were real. They were the reason I kept believing the harder moments were just stress. But Jonah had a habit. When something went wrong, his mind searched for a culprit before it searched for comfort. If Eli spilled juice, Jonah asked who left the cup too close to the edge. If we were running late, Jonah asked why I didn't plan better. He didn't yell, not at first. He built a case. And because I hated conflict, because I hated watching Eli's face change, learned to smooth things over fast. I apologized even when I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. That was my role in our family, the glue, the translator, the one who turned Jonah's sharpness into something softer for Eli to live beside. When Jonah got stern, I got gentle. When Jonah got suspicious, I got reassuring. I believed balance was the same as peace. Eli was 6 then, all long legs and loud opinions. He could sense tension like a dog senses storms. If Jonah and I got clipped with each other, Eli would perform, tell a joke, start a dance, demand a family hug like he could stitch us back together with his arms. Sometimes Jonah would laugh and pull him in. Sometimes Jonah would say, "Not now, buddy," and Eli's smile would wobble. I stepped in every time because it felt like my job to protect my child from adult weather. A few months before everything happened, Jonah started talking about proof. A coworker of his got hit in traffic and the other driver lied. Jonah came home furious, not just at the crash, but at the idea that truth could be argued into something else. "People will say anything," he said, packing our living room. "You need evidence." That weekend, he installed a dashcam in our car. He threaded the wire along the windshield with careful hands like he was building a shield. "This keeps us safe," he told me. "This keeps liars from winning." I nodded, grateful and unsettled by a question I didn't ask. Safe from who? Because Jonah didn't just want protection. He wanted certainty. He wanted a world where someone was always right and someone was always wrong. The morning everything began, nothing felt special. Cereal bowls, a missing shoe, Eli talking about a classmate who cheated at tag. Jonah stood by the counter with his travel mug, scrolling through his phone, already half inside his day. When he left, he kissed Eli, then me, and as his hand touched the doorknob, he added, casual but firm, "Drive careful, don't rush." "I won't," I said, smiling the way I always smiled when I wanted things to stay normal. He looked back at me for a second too long. "Good," he said, like my promise needed his approval to be real. After the door closed, the house went quiet in that soft, familiar way. I packed Eli's backpack, checked the lunchbox, and listened to him hum while he pulled on his jacket. It felt like stability. It felt like we were fine. I didn't know that in a few hours, the road would turn our ordinary life into a before and after. I didn't know the little camera on our windshield was already watching, recording the truth none of us were ready to hear. The day Eli got hurt started like a day with no warning. Sunlight, a rushed breakfast, me chasing a missing shoe while Eli laughed like nothing bad could reach us. I remember thinking we were just busy, normal, lucky, safe. Eli climbed into the back seat with his backpack and a crumpled drawing. "This is you," he said. "Keep it safe." "I will," I promised. He buckled himself with careful hands. "Click," he announced, like the sound could protect us. The dashcam sat on the windshield, centered and blinking. Jonah had installed it the week before and called it peace of mind. Proof. Protection. I didn't argue. When Jonah got that focused look, it felt easier to nod than to question. The drive to school was the same route we always took. Corner shop, park, a hedge at one intersection that made the view tight. Eli talked the whole way: dinosaurs, firefighters, his teacher who talked like a robot. I laughed and watched the road, hands steady, because careful had become my second language. At drop-off, Eli paused with his hand on the door. He leaned forward and whispered, "You'll pick me up, right?" "Of course," I said. "Same time." He ran inside and disappeared. I sat there for one long breath, then drove away, already counting the hours until I'd see him again. The rest of the day was errands and clocks, paperwork, a pharmacy line. Jonah texted, "Don't forget milk." Then, like it was separate, "Drive careful." By mid-afternoon, the sky looked too bright. Pick up at 3, Jonah home before 6. I felt the familiar squeeze of guilt and logistics, so I tried to make everything fit. I grabbed milk. The store was slow. The register was slower. When I got back into the car, every lost minute felt loud. The school pickup line wrapped around the building. I crept forward, inch by inch. When Eli finally appeared, he ran to the car with flushed cheeks and messy hair. He threw his backpack onto the seat and climbed in. "You're late," he said, not angry, just noticing. "The line was long," I said. He buckled in, then leaned his head against the window. "I thought maybe you forgot me," he whispered. My stomach dropped. "Never," I said too fast. "I would never forget you." He nodded, but his fingers tapped the strap across his chest like a tiny drumbeat. I wanted to reach back and cover his hand with mine, but traffic pulled us forward. We turned onto the familiar street that led past the park. Houses, mailboxes, a crosswalk with worn paint. Everything looked ordinary right up until it didn't. Eli started telling me about his day in scattered pieces. A kid who pushed him. A kid who apologized. The dinosaur eraser he wanted. His voice filled the car, light and alive. Then my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I didn't pick it up. I didn't mean to look. But the vibration tugged at my attention like a reflex. My eyes dipped for a fraction of a second, just long enough to see Jonah's name. "Don't rush," his morning voice echoed in my head. I wasn't rushing. I was driving the limit. I was doing what I always did, trying to keep the day from slipping out of my hands. The intersection near the park came up, the one with the hedge that blocks the corner. The light was green. In the opposite lane, a car waited to turn left. I saw its blinker. I saw it start to move. And then everything happened at once. 1 second, one sound, one scream. The car cut across my lane too soon, like I wasn't there. My body reacted before my mind could form a thought. I slammed the brake. The seat belt bit into my shoulder. Tires shrieked. My horn blared, loud and useless. Impact hit like a punch to the world. Metal cracked. The front of my car jerked. The airbags exploded in a white violent bloom that stole my breath and filled the cabin with powder and a sharp chemical smell. My ears rang so loudly it felt like silence. Then Eli screamed. Not a startled cry, a deep ripping sound that turned my blood cold. "Mom, Mom." I clawed at the deflated airbag, coughing. My hands shook so hard I couldn't find the seat belt latch. My mouth tasted like pennies. My brain stuck on one sentence: "Please, please, please." When the latch finally released, I twisted toward the back seat. Eli had been jolted forward against his strap. His eyes were huge and wet. One side of his forehead was swelling fast. I saw blood, just a smear, but it was enough. "I'm hurt," he sobbed. "I'm hurt." "I know, baby," I said, and my voice didn't sound like mine. "Stay still. Look at me. I'm here." Outside, doors opened. Voices rushed in. Someone knocked on my window hard. "There's a child," a man shouted, as if I didn't already know. I stumbled out of the car. The other vehicle sat crooked in the intersection, its front end crumpled. Steam hissed from under its hood. The driver stared ahead, stunned. "What were you doing?" I screamed. It came out raw, not polite, not controlled, just panic. A woman ran up from the sidewalk. "Is he breathing?" she asked. "Yes," I gasped. "He's breathing." "Call 911. Someone yelled, and I heard a voice already spilling details into a phone. I climbed back in and crouched beside Eli's door, keeping my body between him and the crowd. I reached for his hand and held it tight. His fingers were sweaty and trembling. "Listen to me," I whispered. "Mom's here." Sirens arrived, first distant, then close enough to shake the air. Red and blue lights flashed across glass and faces. The paramedics moved with practiced calm. They asked Eli his name. They told him he was brave. They fitted a collar around his neck, and he cried harder, terrified of being held still. "I'm right here," I kept saying. "I'm right here." They slid him onto a board and lifted him toward the ambulance. His eyes kept finding mine, begging. "I'm coming," I promised. "I'm right behind you." As the doors closed, I looked back at my car. The windshield was spiderwebbed. The dashcam was still blinking, still recording. I climbed into the ambulance after them, knees weak, palms streaked with powder and Eli's blood. The doors shut with a final thud, sealing us into flashing light and antiseptic air. Eli kept trying to turn his head toward me, and the collar stopped him, making him cry again. I stroked his hair and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Somewhere in my bag, my phone kept buzzing. Jonah, calling for answers right now, please. On the street, the accident was already turning into paperwork, into statements, into strangers pointing and guessing. I didn't know yet that the crash would be the easiest part to explain. The accident ended there in the intersection. But the real damage, the kind that breaks a home, was waiting for me on the other side of our front door. Jonah didn't meet us at the hospital doors with fear in his eyes the way I expected. He arrived with anger already loaded, like he'd been driving there sharpening it. The first thing he did was hug Eli or touch my shoulder. He looked at my face, then past me, as if he was searching for the mistake he knew must be standing in the room. "What happened?" he demanded. I opened my mouth, but Eli cried out, soft, whimpering pain, and the sound pulled all of me toward my child. A nurse guided us down a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and coffee. Eli was on a gurney now, small inside the stiff collar, his cheeks wet, his fingers clamped around mine like I was the only solid thing left. "It was an accident," I said. "A car turned." Jonah cut me off with a sharp exhale. "An accident doesn't just happen, Mara. Someone causes it." The words landed like a slap, not because they were technically wrong, but because I could hear who he'd already decided that someone was. In the exam room, Jonah hovered at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, jaw tight. Eli's eyes kept flicking to him, then back to me, like he was checking if it was safe to speak. I smoothed Eli's hair and whispered, "You're okay," even though my own hands wouldn't stop shaking. The doctor asked questions. Did he lose consciousness? Was he wearing his seatbelt? Where did he hit his head? I answered each one carefully, desperate to be useful. Jonah stood silent until the doctor left, and then he stepped forward as if the room finally belonged to him. "Were you on your phone?" he asked. The question was so fast, so pointed, it took me a second to understand it. "No," I said. "I mean, I got a text, but I didn't." "So you looked." His voice lifted at the end, not like a question, like a conclusion. "Jesus, Mara." My throat tightened. It buzzed. I glanced down for a second and then the car. Jonah's eyes flashed. 1 second is all it takes. I wanted him to see my fear, the way my chest still hurt from the airbag. But Jonah didn't come to witness my pain. He came to assign it. Eli whimpered, "Daddy." Jonah softened for a breath, just enough to touch Eli's foot through the blanket. "Hey, buddy," he said, voice gentler. Then he looked back at me and the gentleness vanished. "I told you not to rush," he said quietly. "I told you." I wasn't rushing. He laughed once, humorless. "You always think you're careful, and then look." Look, like Eli's swollen forehead was a billboard for my failure. A nurse came in to adjust monitors. Jonah waited until she left, then started again, slower now, like a prosecutor laying out exhibits. "What time did you leave? Why were you late? Did you stop anywhere? Who were you texting?" Each question felt like a rope tightening, and between them I kept hearing Eli's small breaths and the crackle of machines. "Jonah," I said, "can we do this later, please? He's scared." Jonah's mouth hardened. "You want to do it later so you can rehearse," he snapped. "So you can make it sound better." I stared at him. "Make it sound better." He leaned closer, voice low. "If you were paying attention, my son wouldn't be lying here." My son, not our son. The word sliced cleanly down the middle of everything I thought we shared. I felt something inside me recoil. "Don't say that." "Then don't do it," he shot back. "Don't make choices that put him in danger." Eli started crying again, big hiccuping sobs. "Stop," he begged. "Stop fighting." My heart broke in too. I climbed onto the edge of the bed and pressed my forehead to Eli. "We're not fighting," I lied. "We're just talking." But Jonah was looking at me like he'd caught me doing something unforgivable. Like he was the judge and I was the defendant, and the verdict was already stamped. Over the next hours, the hospital became a loop. Tests, waiting, updates. Eli needed scans. Eli needed observation. Eli needed quiet. And still Jonah's questions kept coming, sliding into every silence. When a nurse asked me to fill out paperwork, Jonah stood over my shoulder and watched, correcting details like I was untrustworthy even with a pen. "Write the time correctly," he muttered. "Don't guess." "I'm not guessing," I said, but my voice sounded small. At one point, he stepped into the hallway to take a call, and I heard him through the half-closed door. "Yeah," he said, voice tight. "Mara was driving. Eli's hurt. I don't even know what she was doing, probably distracted." "Probably," he said it like a fact. When he came back in, I tried again. I told him about the other driver turning left. I told him about the green light. I told him how I braked, how it happened so fast my body moved before my thoughts did. Jonah shook his head. "You're always minimizing," he said. "You're always the victim." I blinked. "I'm not." "You want everyone to feel sorry for you," he continued. "But you're the one who made the mistake." Something in me wanted to shout that I was not asking for pity. I was asking for partnership. I was asking for him to stand beside me in the worst moment of our lives, not across from me with a gavel. But the words tangled behind my teeth, because Jonah's certainty made my own memory feel slippery. Had I been more distracted than I realized? Had I checked the message longer than a blink? Had I done something stupid and my brain was protecting me from it? That was the poison of it. Not just his blame, but how quickly it crawled into my head and started rearranging the facts. When the doctor finally returned and said Eli would be okay, no internal bleeding, a concussion to monitor, bruising, rest, relief should have flooded the room. It did, for one breath. I kissed Eli's hair and thanked God and whatever forces had kept him alive. Jonah didn't exhale. He nodded stiffly, like the doctor had simply confirmed Eli's survival, not his innocence. The moment the doctor left, Jonah's eyes went back to me. "Next time," he said, voice quiet and cold, "there won't be a doctor telling us he's okay." My stomach turned. "Jonah, please." He grabbed his jacket. "I can't even look at you right now," he said, and walked out, leaving me in a room full of beeping machines with our son watching my face for answers. As the door clicked shut, Eli whispered, "Is Daddy mad at you?" I stroked his hand and forced a smile that felt like glass. "Daddy, just scared," I said. "We're all scared." And I hated myself for believing him, even for minutes. But inside, the fear was changing shape. It wasn't only about the crash anymore. It was about the story Jonah was building, and the way, already, I was starting to doubt my own. By the time Eli was released from the hospital, Jonah had already decided what happened. Not the facts, those were messy, full of seconds and angles and choices. Jonah didn't like messy. Jonah liked clean stories with sharp edges, a story where someone was responsible and someone was right to be furious. And Jonah told his story the way he did everything, with confidence. At the pharmacy, while I waited for Eli's pain medicine, Jonah spoke to the clerk like a man handling a disaster with control. "My son was in a car accident," he said, loud enough for the people behind us to hear. "Concussion, poor kid, you have to be so careful these days. People get distracted." He didn't say my name, but his eyes slid to me as he said distracted, like he wanted the word to stick to my skin. The clerk made sympathetic noises. "Oh, that's awful. Mom, you doing okay?" she asked me. I opened my mouth, but Jonah answered first. "She's shaken," he said, "as she should be." As she should be, like shame was my rightful consequence. At home, Jonah moved around the house like I'd brought a storm into it. He wiped down door handles. He checked Eli's temperature 3 times. He hovered over him on the couch, flipping between worry and irritation like channels. Eli was quiet, sleepier than usual, his eyes sensitive to light. He leaned into my side and breathed like a tired bird. I kept my arm around him and tried to hold the house together with silence. But Jonah's silence wasn't peace. It was punishment. That first night, Jonah slept on the edge of the bed like a man trying not to touch something contaminated. When I shifted, he shifted away. I lay there staring into the dark, listening to his breathing and feeling like the air between us had turned solid. In the morning, Jonah called his mother. He didn't close the door. He wanted me to hear. "Yeah," he said into the phone, voice heavy. "Eli's okay, but it was close. Mara got distracted, and you know how she is. She panics. She rushes. I keep telling her." I sat at the kitchen table, with Eli's medicine schedule in front of me, and felt my face burn. His mother, Linda, arrived an hour later with casseroles and judgment dressed as concern. She hugged Jonah first, held his shoulders, looked him in the eyes like he'd been the one hit by the car. Then she turned to me and patted my arm like I was a neighbor who'd messed up her garden. "How's our boy?" she asked, already stepping past me toward the living room. Eli lifted his head weakly. "Grandma," he whispered. Linda's face softened completely, instantly. "Oh, sweetheart," she cooed, and then she looked at the bruise blooming near his hairline. Her eyes sharpened as they slid back to me. "Poor baby, Mara, you must have been so flustered." I swallowed. It happened fast. Another car turned. Jonah cleared his throat from the doorway. Linda didn't even pretend to listen to the rest. "Mara means well," Linda said, like I wasn't there. "But she's always been a little scattered." Scattered, like I misplaced keys, like I didn't show up for my own child. I felt Eli's small hand search for mine, and I wrapped my fingers around his. My son was half asleep on the couch, and still I could feel him trying to anchor me. Over the next few days, texts started coming in. "Hope Eli's okay. So scary. Accidents are so common with phones these days. Take care, Mama. Don't beat yourself up." Every message was wrapped in kindness, and everyone carried the same assumption. I had done something wrong. Jonah fed it without lifting a fork. He called friends, coworkers, cousins. He said it like a man reliving a trauma. "I keep seeing it in my head," he told them. "If I hadn't installed that Dashcam, who knows what people would have claimed happened. You can't trust anyone on the road, or in general." In general, his eyes always found me when he said it. The worst part wasn't the way people looked at me. It was the way they stopped asking what I saw. At Eli's follow-up appointment, the nurse smiled warmly at Jonah. "Dad looks exhausted," she said. "You've been through a lot." Jonah nodded, rubbing his temples like a man carrying the weight of the world. "I just want him safe," he said. The nurse turned to me. "And Mom," she said gently, "please don't blame yourself, it happens." I should have been grateful. I should have accepted the comfort. but her softness felt like a cage. It was comfort built on a verdict. I tried to correct it. Actually, another driver. Jonah's hand touched my shoulder, not tender, warning. His fingers pressed lightly, a quiet reminder that he could make this worse if I embarrassed him. The nurse kept speaking. Just be extra mindful, no distractions. Kids need us 100%. I nodded because the room was too small to fight in. I nodded because Eli was sitting there with big, tired eyes, and the last thing he needed was his parents turning his injury into a battle. On the way home, Jonah didn't speak. He drove with both hands locked on the wheel, posture rigid. I watched the road pass and felt like I was riding with a stranger who hated me. That night, when Eli fell asleep early, Jonah sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. I looked up accident statistics, he said without looking at me. Most of them are caused by distracted driving. My stomach tightened. Jonah. And mothers get complacent, he continued. They think they can multitask. They think love is enough. I stared at him. Are you hearing yourself? He finally looked up. His eyes were steady, calm, like he was stating something obvious. I'm hearing the truth. I stood at the sink and gripped the counter, fighting the urge to cry. My whole body felt bruised, not from the crash, but from being slowly pushed out of my own life. Community had always been my comfort. Friends from work who brought soup when we had the flu. Neighbors who waved when we walked Eli to school. Family dinners where someone always asked if I needed help with dishes. Now those same people felt far away, like there was a glass wall between us. They saw Jonah's pain and his certainty, and they believed him because certainty is convincing. Because Jonah's story was loud and clean, and mine was shaky and full of I think, and it happened so fast. I started replaying the crash in my head, like a punishment ritual. The blinker, the hedge, the flash of movement, Eli's scream. I rewound it again and again, searching for the exact moment where I became the villain Jonah needed. Was it the buzz of my phone? Was it my lateness? Was it my breathing? I began to apologize automatically, to Jonah, to Linda, to strangers who asked how Eli was doing. I feel terrible, I'd say. I'll never forgive myself. And people would nod, relieved, like my shame made the world make sense again. Even Eli started watching me like he wasn't sure who I was allowed to be. One afternoon, when Jonah was in the garage, Eli shuffled into the kitchen and leaned against my leg. His head was still tender, and he moved carefully like a boy who'd learned bodies could be fragile. "Mom," he whispered. "Yeah, baby." He hesitated. "Are you bad?" The question knocked the air out of me. I crouched, cupping his face gently. "No," I said, voice breaking. "No, sweetheart, I'm not bad." Eli's eyes filled. "Daddy says you didn't look." My throat burned. I held him tight, trying to keep my shaking from becoming his fear. "Daddy is scared," I said again, and this time it tasted like a lie I was forcing down for survival. That night, after Eli fell asleep, I stood in the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked older than it had a week ago. My eyes looked like they'd been rinsed in guilt. And the scariest thing was this. A part of me was starting to believe them. Not because I remembered doing something wrong, but because Jonah's version was everywhere, echoing in texts, floating in family conversations, settling into the corners of our home like dust. When the same story is repeated enough, it starts to feel like reality, even if it is. I went to the living room and looked at our car keys on the hook by the door. The dashcam in our car came to mind, a small silent witness Jonah had praised as protection. Proof. Anything objective, anything that didn't bend to Jonah's voice, anything that did forget. For the first time since the crash, I felt a strange, sharp need rise in my chest. Not to be forgiven. To be certain. Because if I couldn't trust my own memory anymore, I needed something that could. I didn't wake up that morning thinking, today I'm going to dig up the truth. I woke up thinking, how do I survive another day inside this feeling? The house was quiet in the way it gets after something breaks, too careful, too still, like everyone is afraid noise might shatter whatever's left. Eli was asleep on the couch under a blanket, one arm hanging off the edge, his mouth slightly open. He looked peaceful until you noticed how pale he was, how slow he moved now, like his little body was learning caution. Jonah had already left for work without saying much. He'd kissed Eli's forehead, then glanced at me like I was a problem he hadn't solved yet. "Don't overdo it," he'd said, meaning the errands, the cleaning, the breathing. His words carried the same message they had all week. I was on probation. When the door shut behind him, I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where he'd been. I wanted to feel relief that he was gone. Instead, I felt hollow, like the air had been scooped out of my chest and replaced with guilt. I made coffee I didn't drink. I wiped down countertops that were already clean. I checked Eli's temperature twice just to give my hands something to do. My mind kept replaying the crash like a movie stuck on one brutal scene. The hedge, the left turn, the white explosion of the airbag, Eli's scream. But the replay wasn't clean anymore. Jonah's voice had threaded itself into it, narrating over the images. "You weren't paying attention. You're careless. This is on you." Even when Jonah wasn't in the room, he was in my head, rearranging my memory like furniture. I was folding laundry when I saw it, the car keys on the hook by the door, and beside them, the small fob Jonah had added when he installed the dashcam. "So we'll never be helpless," he'd said, holding the little camera in his palm like a charm against evil. Proof. The word landed in my body like a spark. Proof of what? I wondered again. Proof for who? I walked to the window and looked out at our car in the driveway. It sat there like nothing had ever happened to it, like it hadn't been crushed and towed and repaired, like it hadn't carried my son's scream. The windshield had been replaced, but I could still see the dash cam mounted beneath the rearview mirror, black and unblinking. A tiny eye facing forward. I felt my stomach twist. Because if Jonah was wrong, that camera could free me. And if Jonah was right, if somehow I had truly done something unforgivable, then that camera would seal my shame in something permanent. It would turn my worst moment into a fact. It would make it impossible to hide behind "it happened so fast." I stood there frozen between fear and clarity. Eli stirred on the couch, blinking awake. "Mom," he murmured, voice thick with sleep. "I'm here," I said quickly, forcing warmth into my tone. I went at him and smoothed his hair. "How's your head?" He shrugged carefully, like movement was a question. "Okay," he whispered. Then his eyes searched mine. "Is Daddy still mad?" I swallowed. "Daddy," still scared, I said. The lie tasted familiar now, like medicine you force down because the alternative is worse. Eli looked down at his hands. "I do like when he's loud," he admitted. My heart pinched. Jonah wasn't even shouting most of the time, not the way people imagine loud. But to Eli, sharpness was loud. Coldness was loud. Blame was the loudest thing in our house. I kissed Eli's forehead. "Go watch your show," I said softly. "I'll be right here." He padded to the couch, curled under the blanket again, and turned on cartoons at a low volume. Bright colors danced on the screen, trying to pretend life was normal. I waited until his attention settled, until the room filled with harmless laughter from the TV. Then I walked to the door and picked up the keys. My fingers trembled so much the metal jingled. Out in the driveway, the air was cool. The sky looked painfully ordinary, blue, quiet, uncaring. I opened the driver's side door and sat in the seat like I was stepping back into a haunted room. The first thing I noticed was the smell, faint but still there. Cleaners had tried to erase it, but the car still held a ghost of burned airbag and panic. My chest tightened. I stared at the dash cam. It was so small. A little black rectangle with a lens mounted like it belonged there. Jonah's idea, Jonah's pride, Jonah's proof. I reached up and touched it, my fingertips brushing the edge. I half expected it to bite. My mind raced ahead to all the possibilities. If I pulled the footage and it showed me looking at my phone, even for a second, Jonah would hold it up like a trophy. He wouldn't just blame me, he'd be justified. He'd parade that justification to everyone who'd been kind to him, everyone who'd already believed him. And if it showed something else, if it showed the other driver's fault or something Jonah didn't want seen, then I wasn't just grabbing video. I was grabbing a weapon. That thought made my mouth go dry. I sat back and looked through the windshield at the street. For a moment, I imagined doing nothing, leaving it alone, letting time blur the edges, letting Jonah's story settle until it became the official version. It would be easier. I could keep apologizing. I could keep shrinking. I could keep being the glue until the glue ran out. But then I pictured Eli's face when he asked, "Are you bad?" And something in me snapped into place. My son was learning what truth looked like in our house. He was learning whether the loudest voice wins. He was learning whether a mother has to accept guilt to keep peace. He was learning whether love means being blamed. I couldn't teach him that. I leaned forward and turned the car on, just enough to power the dashcam. The little screen lit up, a timestamp, a blinking red dot. Recording. My hands hovered near the device, uncertain. I remembered Jonah saying, almost proudly, "This way, no one can twist what happened." "No one," he'd said, as if he wasn't capable of twisting anything. I reached for the dash cam and carefully unlatched it from its mount. It came free with a soft click. Underneath, a tiny slot held a memory card, small as a fingernail, light as nothing. A piece of plastic. A piece of plastic that could change everything. I hesitated, card pinched between my fingers but not pulled out yet. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I thought about Jonah's face when he accused me, the coldness in his voice. I thought about Linda calling me scattered. I thought about the texts from friends who meant well but had already chosen a side. I thought about Eli flinching when Jonah's tone shifted. Fear rose up, thick and choking, because what I was doing felt like betrayal. And then a different thought rose underneath it, quiet, steady, undeniable. No, what Jonah did was betrayal. I slid the card out. It made a tiny sound, barely more than a whisper, but it felt like the loudest thing I'd done in years. I held it in my palm and stared at it, proof sitting quietly in plastic, evidence with no emotion, no loyalty, no need to protect anyone's pride. My breath came out shaky. This could destroy my marriage, I thought. Or it could save my life inside it. I slipped the memory card into my pocket like it was fragile and dangerous, like it could explode if I handled it wrong. Then I locked the car and walked back to the house with my legs trembling, feeling like I'd just picked up a grenade and decided to pull the pin. Inside, Eli's cartoon laughter filled the room. I forced my face into something calm as I passed him. "You okay, baby?" I asked. He nodded, eyes on the screen. "Yeah." I went into the bedroom and shut the door. My laptop sat on the desk, ordinary, waiting. I pulled the memory card from my pocket and held it up in the light. For a second, I closed my eyes and prayed. Not for Jonah, not for me, but for the truth to be strong enough to stand on its own. Then I opened my eyes, slid the card into the reader, and prepared to watch the moment our lives split in two. The memory card clicked into my laptop like a secret being swallowed. The screen stayed bland and normal, the way it always does before it shows you something that can't be taken back. My hands hovered over the keyboard, and I realized I was holding my breath like a child hiding from thunder. I told myself I only needed to know, not to punish Jonah, not to prove a point, just to stop the constant rewinding in my head, the version with his voice taped over my own. A folder opened. A list of files appeared, stamped with dates and times. The day of the accident stared back at me in neat digital numbers, as if catastrophe could be organized. I clicked the file and the first frame froze. Our windshield view, sunlight across the hood, the calm curve of our street. Then the video moved. At first, it was almost unbearable because it was ordinary. The camera didn't show fear or shame. It showed houses passing by. It showed the sky, too bright, too innocent. And underneath it all was sound, Eli's voice behind me lively, talking about dinosaurs like the world wasn't fragile. Mom, if a T-Rex had a pet, what would it be? He asked. I heard myself laugh. A smaller T-Rex, I said, and Eli giggled. That laugh hit me harder than the crash. It proved something I'd forgotten. Before the impact, I was just a mother in a regular afternoon, driving a regular route, trying to get her kid home. The timestamp ticked forward. The cabin stayed calm. I watched my own hands on the wheel and waited for the moment Jonah swore I got distracted, like the footage would eventually admit it was my fault. A soft chime sounded, my phone. The dashcam microphone caught it cleanly, a buzz against plastic in the cup holder. The camera didn't show the screen, but in the reflection of the rearview mirror my eyes stayed on the road. My head didn't dip. Who is it? Eli asked. It's nothing, I heard myself say. Probably Daddy. Another chime, another vibration. Then the car system announced it, clear as a bell. Jonah. My stomach dropped, not because he called, but because he'd never said he called while I was driving, not when he accused me of being careless. In the mirror reflection, I saw my mouth form words. I can't talk, I said. I'm driving. The call rang out. I didn't answer. The road stayed steady. Then the message chimes started, one, then another, like pressure piling up. I whispered, barely audible, please stop. It was eerie hearing my own voice. I didn't remember saying it. I remembered Jonah as the one demanding calm. In the footage, I was the one begging for it. The video rolled toward the park road. Trees, mailboxes, the hedge at the intersection that always made me cautious. My speed stayed even. The dashcam captured the number on the dashboard. Normal. Eli started telling me about his day. Ms. Parker said I was brave because I told the truth, he said. I didn't even cry. That's good, I replied, and I sounded proud. Another buzz, I stiffened. My eyes flicked in the mirror, not down at the phone, but toward the side mirror, checking traffic. The intersection approached. I slowed slightly, careful, the way I always was there. The light ahead was green, bright, undeniable. In the opposite lane, a sedan waited to turn left. Its blinker clicked. For a heartbeat, it looked like it would wait properly. Then it surged across the lane, cutting into our path as if we were invisible. There was no hesitation, no yield, just a confident, wrong decision. In the rearview reflection, my face changed. Not distracted, alert. My mouth opened in a sharp sound I barely remembered making. Hey, I shouted. My foot slammed the brake. The dashcam caught the nose of the car dipping, the speed dropping fast. Tires screamed. The horn blared, long and furious. And then impact. The camera jolted. The airbag exploded into the frame, a white cloud swallowing the view. The microphone cracked with the sound of metal folding, then Eli's scream, high and raw, slicing through everything. Mom. Even expecting it, I flinched. Tears blurred the screen. I could hear myself gasping, coughing on powder. Eli, I said, frantic. Eli, talk to me. He sobbed. My head. Outside voices rushed in. Someone yelled about a child. Sirens began in the distance. But beneath the chaos was certainty. The light had been green, my hands had been on the wheel, and the other driver had turned into us. Jonah's accusations didn't fit anywhere in the frame. I watched it again because my brain refused to accept relief without punishment. The second time, I noticed small things that felt enormous. My hands never left the wheel until the brake. My shoulders stayed square. The phone in the cup holder lit up and went dark, like a firefly I kept refusing to chase. On the dashboard, my car flashed a tiny notification, hands-free, polite, almost cheerful. It didn't show a scrolling feed or a long conversation. It showed one name over and over, Jonah, call, call, call. Then a short text preview that made my stomach clench. Where are you? Then answer. So when Jonah told people I was probably texting, he was telling a half-truth wrapped around a lie. There had been texting in the car, just not from me. I pressed pause and stared at the frozen frame of the green light. My mind tried to argue with itself anyway. Maybe I should have predicted the sedan would jump. Maybe a better driver would have avoided it. Maybe, until I realized that was Jonah living in my head again, training me to take responsibility for the choices other people make. The footage didn't allow that kind of distortion. It was blunt, a green light, a turning car that didn't yield, my brake and horn arriving at the only moment they could. I dragged the timeline back, slowed it down, and froze it at the moment the sedan crossed the line. And there, clear as a confession, was the driver's head angled down, his hand lifted near his face. It looked like a phone held close while he cut across traffic. I sat back, shaking. The irony tasted bitter. Jonah had built his whole story around distracted driving, and the distracted driver wasn't me. Eli's words from earlier, brave because I told the truth, came back like a mirror held up to my face. My son had spent his day learning that honesty matters, while his father spent the evening teaching the opposite. Whoever speaks loudest gets believed. Anger rose in me, but beneath it was grief. Grief for the marriage I thought we had, for the partnership I kept defending, for the way Jonah could watch our child hurt and still choose me as the target. The video was certainty, but certainty isn't comfort. It's a doorway, one you have to step through, and I knew the next step would cost me something. Then I noticed the call markers again. I rewound to the minutes before the crash and listened, really listened, to the pattern. Jonah's call, then another, then the texts piling up like impatience. And then I found the moment I'd forgotten entirely. 5 minutes before everything broke, when the car's speakers announced another incoming call. Jonah. This time I answered, voice clipped. What? Where are you? Jonah snapped through the speakers. You said 3, it's after 3. I'm on my way, I said. I'm driving. You're always on your way, he shot back. Pay attention, don't mess this up. I stared at the screen, stunned. There was his critical choice, recorded in his own voice. He had called while I was driving, loaded the car with pressure, then later used that pressure as a weapon against me. Jonah, I heard myself say low. Stop, Eli's in the car. A beat of silence, then Jonah, colder. So is your responsibility. I shouldn't have to remind you. The call ended. Minutes later, the other driver turned, and Eli screamed. My chest ached with a new pain, sharper than fear. Jonah had walked into the hospital and accused me with certainty, while the dashcam held his own voice, his own missing piece of the truth. He knew he'd been calling. He knew he'd been pushing. And he still pointed at me like a verdict because it was easier than admitting anything that threatened his control. I saved the file, then copied it onto a flash drive with trembling fingers, as if the truth might vanish if I didn't lock it in multiple places. When the transfer finished, I stared at the tiny device in my hand and felt no relief, only the terrifying awareness that evidence doesn't automatically become safety. Proof doesn't set you free by itself, especially when the guilty person is your spouse. I did confront Jonah the way people imagine confrontation, dramatic, loud, righteous. I didn't storm into the living room waving a flash drive like a weapon. I didn't shout, look at what you did. Because I wasn't brave like that yet. I was still a woman living inside a house where anger had rules, and those rules were written by my husband. So I planned it carefully, like you plan a delicate medical procedure. Steady hands, controlled environment, no sudden movements. Eli was napping. The curtains were drawn to keep the room dim for his concussion. The dishwasher hummed. The world outside our windows was calm enough to feel insulting. Jonah came home late, shoulders tense, keys tossed onto the counter with a sharp clatter. How's he? He asked, and for half a second I heard the father in him, the man who loved our son. He fell asleep about 20 minutes ago, I said. He said his head feels better. Jonah nodded once. He didn't smile. He didn't kiss my cheek. He walked past me and opened the fridge like the day required food, but not kindness. I watched him, and my stomach churned with the secret in my pocket. A flash drive small enough to hide in my palm, heavy enough to change everything. Jonah, I said quietly. He didn't look up. What? I hated that single word, flat and sharp. I forced my voice to stay calm. We need to talk about the accident. That got his attention. He shut the fridge and turned, eyes narrowing like I'd just admitted to a crime. We already talked about it. No, I said. You talked at me about it. His jaw clenched. Mara, not now. I took a breath and reminded myself, careful, calm, don't poke the bear. I found the dashcam footage, I said, soft as if I was offering him a chance to breathe. I watched it. For a second, his face went still. Not shocked, calculating, like a man doing math in his head. Then he scoffed. So you've been digging through things now. It's our dashcam, I said. You installed it. For safety, he snapped, as if that word belonged only to him. Not so you can build your little case. My pulse jumped. I'm not building a case. I needed to know what happened, for real. Jonah's eyes flicked toward the hallway, checking if Eli could hear. His voice lowered, but it didn't soften. I know what happened. You think you know, I corrected, and my hands started to shake. I tucked them under the edge of the counter to hide it. The footage shows the light was green. The other driver turned left into us. I hit the brakes. I wasn't on my phone. Jonah stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Then he laughed, short, sharp, ugly. Of course you'd say that. I'm not saying it, I insisted. It's recorded. He stepped closer. Recorded from one angle, he said, voice rising. From one lens that doesn't show everything. It shows enough, I said. It shows I didn't cause it. His face changed then like a switch flipped. The calm calculation disappeared and something hotter filled its place. So you're innocent, he said, dripping sarcasm. You're perfect, and I'm the villain now. That's not what I... That's exactly what you're doing, he cut in, voice louder. You're trying to rewrite it so you don't have to feel guilty. I stared at him, stunned by the audacity. Jonah, I feel guilty because Eli got hurt. I'm his mother, but guilt isn't the same as blame. His nostrils flared. Don't play word games with me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the flash drive, holding it between my fingers like a fragile tooth. Just watch it, I said. Please, watch it with me. Jonah didn't take it. He looked at it like it was filthy. No. Jonah. I said no, he snapped, and the sound cracked through the kitchen like a thrown dish. I'm not going to sit here and let you twist a video to make yourself look better. My throat tightened. It's not twisting, it's... He stepped closer again. His voice dropped, dangerous. You think you're slick, he said. You think because you found a clip you can walk around acting like I owe you an apology. My eyes stung. You do owe me an apology. The words escaped before I could stop them, and the moment they landed, Jonah's expression went dark with something like disbelief. An apology, he repeated slowly, like tasting something disgusting. After what you did to my son. Our son, I corrected automatically. He leaned in, and I felt the air tighten. Don't you dare correct me, he hissed. Not after you almost killed him. I froze. The accusation wasn't new, but the way he said it was steadier, colder, like he wanted me to hear it as a permanent label. I didn't, my voice cracked. Jonah, the other driver. Doesn't matter, he snapped. You were in charge of him, you were driving, you're responsible. The logic was insane, but it was also powerful, because it made him the judge no matter what the facts were. If responsibility meant guilt no matter what, then I could never win. I swallowed hard and forced myself back to the proof. The footage also shows something else, I said carefully. It records audio, and it recorded you calling, multiple times. Jonah's eyes flickered, just a flicker. But I saw it, recognition, a split second of awareness that the truth had a second edge. So what? He snapped quickly, too quickly. I called to check on you. You were yelling at me, I said, voice shaking now. You were pressuring me while I was driving, Jonah. You were telling me not to mess up. Eli was in the car. Jonah's face hardened like stone. That is not what happened. It is, I insisted. I heard it, your voice is on. Stop, his voice cut through mine like a blade. Stop trying to put this on me. I stared at him. I'm not putting the crash on you. I'm saying you can't blame me and pretend you weren't part of the chaos. Jonah's mouth twisted. Oh, so now I'm the reason some idiot ran a red light. He didn't run a red light, I said, and my hands lifted helplessly. It was green for us. He turned. Jonah slammed his palm on the counter so hard the coffee mugs rattled. Enough. The sound made my whole body flinch. In the dim living room, Eli shifted in his sleep, murmuring. Jonah glanced toward the hallway and lowered his voice again, but the rage stayed. You're unbelievable, he said. You watch a video once and suddenly you think you're some kind of investigator. I watched it twice, I whispered, not because it mattered, but because my mind still reached for little proofs, little shields. Jonah's eyes narrowed. So you've been obsessing. I've been trying to breathe, I said, and the tears I'd been holding finally spilled. I've been living in your version of it, Jonah. Everyone thinks I'm a bad mother. Eli asked me if I'm bad. For a moment, I thought the sentence might break through him. The mention of Eli, the mention of our child questioning my worth. Jonah's face didn't soften. Instead, he scoffed like I'd tried a cheap trick. Don't bring him into this. I stared at him, incredulous. He's already in this. He was in the car. Jonah stepped back, shaking his head like he couldn't believe I was still standing. You know what you're doing, he said, voice low and bitter. You're trying to ruin me. The words hit with a strange chill. Ruin you. Yes, he said, pointing at the flash drive still in my hand. You want to show people that. You want to make me look like the bad guy, so you can be the poor victim again. I blinked. The truth was sitting in my palm, and still he saw himself as the one being attacked. I didn't show anyone, I said softly. I haven't told anyone. I came to you first. Jonah's laugh was harsh. Because you're calculating. Because you're my husband, I whispered. Because I thought we're supposed to face things together. His eyes went flat. Together, he repeated, after you tried to cover your tracks. Something inside me went quiet. Not calm, quiet like a door closing. I didn't cover anything, I said, and my voice sounded different. I didn't even answer the phone, and you know that because you were the one calling. Jonah's face twisted with anger, but beneath it I saw something else now, fear. Not fear for Eli, fear for his image, fear for losing the story he'd been telling. He took a step toward me and lowered his voice again. Listen, he said, and it was the tone he used when he wanted control. You're not going to spread this around. Do you understand me? My heart pounded. Spread what? The truth. Jonah's eyes flashed. The footage, it's misleading. People don't understand context. They'll think. They'll think what? I demanded, and my voice rose despite myself. That you blamed me without watching. That you called me careless while you were calling me over and over. That you let everyone believe I was distracted when the dashcam shows I was. Jonah's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jump. You're twisting it, he spat. You always twist things. The old me, the glue, the smoother wanted to back down. To say, okay, let's not fight, let's be calm, Eli is sleeping. But the footage had done something to me. It had taken the fog out of my head and replaced it with something sharp. Certainty. I'm not twisting anything, I said, and my voice didn't shake this time. I'm done living inside your lie. Jonah's eyes widened, and for the first time he looked genuinely startled, not by the dash cam, but by me, by the fact that I was standing upright. Then his face filled with rage again. Fine, he hissed. You want the truth is you're reckless, and now you're trying to cover it up by blaming me, you're sick. The cruelty was so casual, so rehearsed, that it stunned me into silence. He believed his own words, or he needed to, because admitting anything else would crack his ego open. Eli stirred in the living room, murmuring my name in his sleep. The sound anchored me. I looked at Jonah, really looked at him, and saw what the dashcam had revealed beyond the crash. Jonah didn't need facts. He needed innocence. He needed to be right more than he needed to be kind. And if being right required me to be guilty, then guilt was the role he'd assign me every time. He reached for the flash drive, not to watch it, to take it. I closed my fist around it. No, I said quietly. Jonah's eyes narrowed. Give it to me. No, I repeated, and my voice was steady, almost calm. You don't get to control the truth. For a moment, the kitchen felt like the intersection again. Seconds stretching, air tightening, a choice hanging between us. Jonah's hands curled into fists. His breathing turned sharp. And I realized, with a clarity that scared me more than the crash ever had, the accident wasn't the only danger in my life. Jonah's need to be innocent was. That night, after Jonah's rage finally burned itself down into a cold silence, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and realized something terrifying. The dashcam hadn't just recorded the crash. It had recorded me, the way I moved through fear, the way I kept trying to do the right thing, the way I bent myself into smaller shapes to avoid conflict. And once I saw that version of myself from the outside, I couldn't unsee it. The truth was supposed to feel like relief. Instead, it felt like waking up in a house you've lived in for years and suddenly noticing all the locks are on the inside. Jonah slept beside me like nothing was wrong. His back faced me, the space between us wide and deliberate. I listened to his breathing and thought about how quickly he'd turned the dashcam into an enemy, how fast proof became misleading the moment it threatened him. It wasn't new behavior, it was just new lighting. The next morning, while Eli watched cartoons with the volume low, I poured cereal into a bowl and drifted back through time, not by choice, but like my mind finally gave itself permission to line up the evidence. There was the first year of our marriage, when Jonah framed his intensity as devotion. I just worry about you, he'd say if I stayed late at work. You don't answer your phone and my mind goes everywhere. I'd apologize for making him worry, even though I'd been doing my job. I'd promised to text more, call more, keep him informed. It felt like compromise at the time, love adjusting itself. Then there was the second year, when compromise started to look like permission. He'd ask who's going before I met friends for coffee. If I said their names, he'd nod, but his questions didn't stop. Who else will be there? What time will you be back? Why can't you just go tomorrow? If I pushed back, he'd sigh like I'd failed a test. I'm your husband, he'd remind me. I should know where you are. And if I insisted anyway, he'd become wounded, quiet, sulky, the kind of hurt that made me chase him with comfort, the kind of hurt that made me believe I was the one breaking trust. I used to think love was sacrifice, and I was good at sacrifice. I could sacrifice sleep, time, even pride. I didn't realize I was also sacrificing my own reality. The dashcam footage had shown me a small moment, Jonah calling, pressuring, then later acting like he'd been an innocent bystander. That switch, that flipping of the story wasn't a new trick. It was a pattern I'd been living inside. I could see it now, in 100 small memories. The time our washing machine flooded the laundry room. Jonah came home, saw the water, and immediately asked, "What did you do?" I didn't, I started. You must have overloaded it, he said, already pulling out his phone to look up repairs. You never listen when I tell you not to cram it full. I stood there dripping wet from mopping and apologized for being careless, until later, when the repairman said the hose was cracked from age. Jonah didn't say sorry. He shrugged and said, "Well, it didn't help." It didn't help. Even when it wasn't my fault, Jonah found a way to make me feel like it still belonged to me. Or the time Eli got sick at daycare, and I rushed to pick him up. Jonah met us at home and looked at Eli's flushed face with worry. Then he looked at me. How did you not notice he was coming down with something? He demanded. He was fine this morning, I said, exhausted. Jonah shook his head. You're not observant, he said like a diagnosis. You miss things. I remember the heat that rose in my cheeks, the way shame slipped in before anger could. I remember thinking, maybe I do miss things. Maybe I'm not good enough at this. It's strange how control works. It doesn't always arrive as a command. Sometimes it arrives as a story about who you are, careless, scattered, emotional. And once you accept the story, you start building your life around proving it wrong. You exhaust yourself trying to become a person who can't be blamed. I became an expert at preemptive apology. Sorry, I didn't mean. Sorry, I forgot. Sorry, I misunderstood. Those words became my reflex, my shield, my way to smooth the air. And Jonah grew used to the power of them. Like an addict grows used to a drug, he needed my apology to feel steady. Even our social life changed, little by little. At first, Jonah came with me everywhere. Then he started complaining. Your friends don't really like me, he'd say. They judge me. I'd protest, confused. They don't. They do, he insisted. I can tell, they look at me like I'm the bad guy. So I stopped inviting him. Then he'd sigh and say, I just don't like you going out without me. People talk. Then I stopped going out as much. He never said, you can't see your friends. He just made it feel like the price of seeing them was a fight I didn't have the energy to win. He made it feel like peace required me to shrink my world. Protection, he called it. I just want you safe, he'd say, frowning at my outfit before I left. That neighborhood isn't great. Why don't you just stay home? I thought it was love. Now, looking back, it felt like possession. Because love doesn't need you smaller to feel secure. Love doesn't punish you for existing outside of it. That realization didn't arrive like a dramatic revelation. It arrived like nausea, like my body finally recognizing something my mind had been denying. And then there were the moments with Eli, moments I dismissed because I didn't want to see them clearly. The way Jonah corrected Eli's words sharply. No, say it right. The way Eli's shoulders would tighten. The way Jonah would say, stop crying, you're fine, when Eli was clearly not fine. And then how I would swoop in with softness and repair, whispering, it's okay, baby, as if I could erase Jonah's tone like rubbing out pencil marks. I told myself it was normal parenting stress. I told myself Jonah didn't mean harm. I told myself Eli needed a strong father, and Jonah was strong. But strength isn't the same as control. The dashcam showed Jonah pressuring me, then blaming me. And the worst part was the ease of it, how natural it was for him to rearrange the story to protect his own innocence. That ease meant he'd practiced. That ease meant he'd done it before. I thought about the way Jonah looked when I refused to hand over the flash drive, surprised, offended, furious. Not because I was cruel, but because I was no longer obedient. He didn't see my boundaries as healthy. He saw them as betrayal. That's when the truth sharpened into something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't about the crash. This was about who Jonah needed me to be. He needed me to be the one who absorbs blame because it kept him clean. He needed me to be the one who doubts herself because doubt makes you easier to lead. He needed me to be the glue because glue doesn't get to have needs. Glue doesn't get to say no. I carried my cereal bowl to the sink and stared out the window at the driveway. Our car sat there with its little camera, silent and perfect. For years, I'd lived like the goal was to win Jonah's approval. Like if I could just be careful enough, organized enough, calm enough, he would finally relax and treat me gently. But Jonah's calm wasn't something I could earn. It was something he granted when I was useful. And suddenly, I didn't want to earn anything from him anymore. Not approval, not forgiveness, not permission to exist. Eli wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. Mom, he whispered, can we have pancakes? My heart softened. Yeah, I said, we can. He leaned against my leg the way he always did, and I realized I'd been measuring my life by Jonah's moods instead of by my son's safety, by my son's peace, by the truth. I knelt down, brushing Eli's hair back gently. You're safe, I told him, and this time I wasn't just talking about the world outside. I was making a promise to myself, too. Because the dashcam hadn't just given me evidence, it had given me a turning point. I wasn't going to keep trying to win Jonah anymore. I was going to start planning, quietly, carefully, for safety, stability, and truth. The first thing I did was stop treating the truth like a fragile secret. For days, I'd carried that flash drive like it was something alive, something that could bite me, something that could explode if Jonah noticed it missing. I hid it in the back of my sock drawer, then moved it to a cookbook, then into the pocket of a winter coat Eli hadn't worn in months. Every hiding place felt childish, but fear makes you irrational. Fear makes you think the truth is safest when it's silent. Then I pictured Jonah's hand reaching for it, not to watch it, but to take it. And something in me steadied. If the truth could be taken from me that easily, then I didn't own my own life. So that morning, while Jonah was at work and Eli was coloring at the kitchen table with his tongue poking out in concentration, I sat down at my laptop and made copies. One copy on a flash drive, one copy on an external hard drive I'd forgotten we even had, one copy uploaded to a private folder with a password Jonah wouldn't guess, because Jonah guessed things the way he judged people, by assuming the worst in them and the simplest in me. I named the folder something boring: taxes, utilities, anything. My hands shook less with every click. When I finished, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sober, like I had finally accepted that I was not dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with a man who would rather protect his story than protect his wife. I looked across the table at Eli. He was humming, coloring a bright blue dinosaur, carefully staying inside the lines. He looked up at me and smiled, and that small smile reminded me what this was really about. Not Jonah's pride. My son's reality. I made a call next, one I'd been avoiding because it made everything real. My sister, Nia. Nia and I weren't the kind of sisters who talked every day, but she was the kind of person who listened like she was holding you steady. She lived 20 minutes away and had always told me, half joking, "If you ever need an exit, I've got a couch." At the time, I laughed like it was dramatic, like exits were for other people. When she answered, she said, "Hey, you okay?" In that tone that meant she already knew the answer. I swallowed. "Can you talk?" "Yeah, what's going on?" And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I told the truth, without apologizing for it. I told her about the crash. I told her about Jonah blaming me at the hospital, the way he'd spoken like a verdict. I told her about Linda calling me scattered. I told her about Eli asking if I was bad. My voice cracked in places, but I didn't backtrack. I didn't soften it to protect Jonah's image. I didn't add disclaimers like, "He's a good guy though," or "He's just stressed." When I finished, Nia was quiet for a long beat. Then she said, very calmly, "Do you have the footage?" "Yes," I whispered. "Good," she said. "Keep it, make copies." I did. Another pause. Then, "Mara, are you safe right now?" The question hit me harder than I expected because it forced me to separate physical safety from emotional survival. Jonah hadn't hit me. Jonah hadn't shoved me. Jonah didn't need to. He could shrink me with words. He could isolate me with shame. He could make me doubt my own eyes. "I don't know," I admitted. He's angry." Nia exhaled. "Okay, here." "What we're going to do," she said, and her voice had that grounded firmness I'd always envied. "You're coming over today. Bring Eli if you can. Bring your important documents, and we're going to talk options." Options. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like something only other women had. "I can't just," I started automatically. "Yes, you can," Nia cut in, not harsh but sure. "You're allowed to leave a situation that's hurting you." I stared at the kitchen wall, heart pounding. "He'll freak out." "Let him," she said. "You can't keep absorbing his freakouts. That's not your job." After I hung up, I sat there with my hands flat on the table, breathing slowly, letting my body catch up to what my mind had just admitted. I was going to act. Not threaten, not plead, not negotiate with Jonah's moods. Act. Next, I called the clinic where I worked and asked for a half-day off. My voice was steady, professional, like I was discussing scheduling, because I couldn't afford to fall apart yet. Then I called Eli's doctor's office and asked a simple question about concussion recovery, about stress and environment, about what mattered beyond medicine. The nurse on the phone told me rest, low stimulation, predictable routine. Predictable routine. My throat tightened. Because Jonah's house wasn't predictable. Jonah's house was a pendulum, warm 1 hour, cold the next. Love, then punishment. Calm, then interrogation. I made another call, one that scared me more than I wanted to admit. Not to police. Not yet. I called a legal aid office in our area and asked general questions about custody, documentation, and what to do if a spouse is trying to control the narrative of an incident involving a child. I kept it vague. I didn't want to say Jonah's name out loud to a stranger. I still wasn't ready for that. But the lawyer on the phone asked, "Do you have evidence?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Secure it," she advised, "and write down everything you remember, dates, times, statements. Don't rely on memory alone." After I hung up, I opened a notebook and started writing. I wrote Jonah's exact words at the hospital. I wrote Linda's comments. I wrote the times Jonah called, the way the dashcam recorded his pressure, the way he later described me as distracted. I wrote down the moment Eli asked me if I was bad. Each sentence felt like lifting a heavy object off my chest and placing it somewhere solid. Then I packed. Not everything, not dramatic suitcases. I packed like someone who didn't want to wake the house. I gathered Eli's medical papers, his birth certificate, my ID, the flash drives, the hard drive, a few changes of clothes, Eli's favorite blanket, the dinosaur he slept with worn and missing an eye. Eli watched me from the couch, cartoons playing quietly. "Where are we going?" he asked, small and curious. I walked over and knelt in front of him. "We're going to Auntie Nia's for a little bit," I said, "just to rest." His eyes widened. "Is Daddy coming?" I held his hands gently. "Not right now." Eli looked down, thinking hard. Did I do something? My heart cracked. "No," I said quickly. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault." He nodded slowly, and I could see him trying to accept it, the way children accept earthquakes. They don't understand, but they still have to live through it. Before we left, I wrote Jonah a message. Not a long one, not emotional. "I'm taking Eli to Nia's so he can rest. We'll talk later." I stared at the screen for a long time before sending it. My old instinct screamed to add more: reassurance, explanation, apology. Something to soften the blow so Jonah wouldn't explode. Then I remembered what the lawyer said. Don't rely on emotion. Rely on clarity. I hit send. The drive to Nia's felt unreal. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest trembled. Eli sat in the back seat, quiet, clutching his blanket. Halfway there, Jonah called. The phone lit up with his name, bright and demanding. My stomach tightened, but my fingers didn't reach for it. I let it ring out. Then it rang again, and again. Eli whispered, "Daddy, calling." "I know," I said softly. "We're okay." When we reached Nia's, she opened the door before I could knock. She pulled me into a hug that made my knees go weak. "You did the right thing," she murmured into my hair. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Not yet. I was still in motion. Inside, Nia gave Eli a snack and set him up on the couch with pillows and a quiet movie. Then she led me to her kitchen and poured water into a glass like it was an emergency response. "Okay," she said. "Tell me what you need." I took out the flash drive and set it on the table between us. "I need him to stop," I said. My voice was low, steady. "I need him to stop making me the villain." Nia's eyes sharpened. "He won't stop if it works for him," she said, "so you have to stop letting it." That evening, Jonah texted a dozen times. "Where are you? Bring him home. You're being dramatic. You're kidnapping my son. Don't make me do something." Each message was a hook designed to pull me back into panic, back into pleading, back into the role I'd always played. But something had shifted. The dashcam had given me certainty. Nia had given me a witness. The notebook in my bag held my reality in ink. When Jonah finally called again, I answered, not because I wanted to fight, but because I wanted to set a line. His voice exploded through the speaker the second I said hello. "What the hell are you doing?" I kept my voice calm. "Eli needs rest. He's staying here tonight." "You don't get to decide that," Jonah snapped. I looked at the flash drive on the table and felt my spine straighten. "I do," I said. "I'm his mother." "You're trying to turn everyone against me," he hissed. "I'm not turning anyone," I said. "I'm telling the truth." Jonah's breathing went sharp. You're twisting it. I have the footage, I said simply, and I'm done arguing with your version of reality. A beat of silence, then Jonah's voice dropped cold. So you're threatening me? I took a breath. No, I said. I'm protecting my son and myself. The line hung in the air between us. I could feel Jonah searching for the old lever. Guilt, fear, shame. But the lever wasn't working the same way anymore. Because I had chosen something bigger than his approval. I had chosen my son over his story. And I realized then, with a steadiness that surprised even me, the final confrontation wouldn't be loud. It would be final. The first time Jonah watched the footage, he didn't watch it all the way through. That's the part people don't understand about proof. They think evidence walks into a room and everyone becomes reasonable. They think truth is a switch you flip, and suddenly the liar stops lying. But Jonah didn't stop. Jonah adapted. We met in a small office at a mediator's building 2 weeks after I left. The room smelled like copier ink and old coffee. The mediator sat between us with a yellow notepad. Jonah wore his calm face, the one he used in public. The good father face. He nodded politely, asked about Eli's symptoms, spoke in a measured voice like he was the injured party trying to be fair. I almost believed it for a second. Old habits die hard. Then the mediator asked, "Do you have any documentation related to the accident or the conflict that followed?" My hand went to my bag. Jonah's eyes sharpened. "I do," I said, and my voice didn't shake. I handed over a copy of the footage and a written timeline. Jonah's jaw tightened. He looked at the mediator and smiled thinly. "She's really running with this," he said, like it was adorable. The mediator played the video on a laptop. The green light, the left turn, my brake, Eli's scream, Jonah's name flashing on the dashboard, Jonah's voice, pressuring, impatient, telling me not to mess up. Jonah watched with his arms crossed, a statue of denial. When the clip ended, the mediator looked up slowly. "Mr. Hale," she said carefully, "this footage contradicts your earlier statement that Mara was distracted." Jonah shrugged, careless. "It doesn't show her eyes," he said. "It doesn't show what she was doing, and audio can be misleading." Misleading, the same word he'd used in my kitchen, the same escape hatch. The mediator paused, then said, "It does show repeated incoming calls and texts from you immediately prior to the crash." Jonah's smile slipped for half a second. Then he leaned back and said, "I was trying to locate my child." His child. Again, that possessive language like a claim. I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest. Anger, yes, but also something steadier underneath it. The urge to stop defending myself. To stop pleading for fairness from someone who fed on imbalance. So I didn't argue. I just said, the footage is what it is. And for the first time in years, I let the truth stand without me holding it up. After that meeting, consequences didn't arrive like thunder. They arrived like gravity, slow, inevitable, pulling Jonah's story down. The other driver's insurance took responsibility once the footage was reviewed. The police report was amended with the video evidence. Medical bills got processed differently. The accident stopped being Mara's mistake and became what it always was, a collision caused by someone else's reckless choice. That should have been the end. But Jonah had built more than an accusation. He'd built a reputation for himself as the heroic father, managing an unstable wife. He had fed that story to family and friends with charisma and certainty, and people had swallowed it because it was easier than admitting a man they liked could be cruel. So when the truth surfaced, not everyone apologized. Some people went quiet. Some changed the subject. Some pretended they hadn't judged me in the first place. Linda called me one evening and said, "I saw that video. I still think you could have been more careful." I listened to her for a moment, then said, calmly, "Linda, I'm not discussing this with you anymore." Her voice went stiff. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said. "Eli is healing. I'm healing. I'm not accepting blame that isn't mine. If you can't respect that, we don't need to talk." The line went silent. I expected guilt to flood me, the old guilt, the reflex guilt. It didn't. What I felt instead was relief, sharp and clean. Because boundaries don't always feel empowering at first. Sometimes they just feel like air returning to your lungs. Jonah tried other angles. He texted late at night with soft words, the kind he used when he wanted me back in my role. I'm sorry you feel hurt. We can move past this. Don't destroy our family over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That's what he called a week of blame and a child asking his mother if she was bad. I didn't respond. When he escalated, when the messages turned sharp again, Nia and I documented everything. Dates, times, exact words, screenshots. The same way I documented the crash because I'd learned the hard lesson. Memory can be pressured, but records don't flinch. Eli adjusted slowly. Healing a concussion is one thing. Healing a child's sense of safety is another. The first time Jonah picked Eli up for a short visit, Eli clung to me at the door and whispered, "Will Daddy be mad?" I crouched and held his face gently. "Daddy's feelings are not your job," I told him. "You are not responsible for making adults calm." He stared at me like the words were new. And maybe they were, because I realized I'd never taught my child that before. I'd been too busy modeling the opposite, shrinking, smoothing, apologizing. So I started teaching it with my actions. My new life wasn't dramatic. It was small, practical, intentional. A spare bedroom at Nia's became our nest for a while. I made Eli a routine: breakfast, quiet play, rest, a walk if the light didn't bother him. I returned to work slowly. I built a budget. I found a therapist who didn't ask me why I stayed, but asked me how I wanted to feel again. Safe. Whole. Certain. I also learned to forgive myself for something Jonah had used against me: my softness. Being gentle didn't make me weak. It made me human. What made me vulnerable was when my gentleness became permission for someone else to harm me. Jonah never said the words I once begged to hear. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." Maybe he couldn't. Maybe admitting the truth would have cracked his identity open, and Jonah loved his identity more than he loved peace. But here's what surprised me. I didn't need him to confess anymore. Because the Dashcam had already done it. Not just about the crash, but about the kind of man Jonah was when he thought he had control. The footage didn't show fists or bruises. It showed pressure. It showed manipulation. It showed how easily he could create chaos and then punish me for it. And once I saw that, I stopped trying to rescue him from consequences. That's what accountability is, I learned. It's not revenge, it's reality. The Dashcam didn't break us. The lie did. The lie that Jonah could blame me and still call it love. The lie that my silence was loyalty. The lie that being a family meant swallowing pain to keep the peace. Love without honesty is not protection. It's a weapon. And I refuse to hand my child a weapon and call it home. Sometimes I think about the day Jonah installed that Dashcam, so proud, so sure. He wanted proof so liars wouldn't win. He just didn't consider that the liar might be him. In the end, that little camera didn't give me a dramatic victory. It gave me something quieter, stronger, a backbone. It gave me the courage to stop negotiating with a story that was killing my spirit. It gave me permission to choose integrity over comfort, truth over togetherness, my son's peace over my husband's pride. And if you're listening to this and you feel that familiar ache, the ache of being blamed, doubted, minimized, let me say what I wish someone had said to me sooner. If the proof was already recorded, how long would you stay inside someone else's lie?